The Oklahoma sun beat down, turning the air thick with dust and the smell of horses. It was 1876, and the small town square was a jumble of wagons, barking dogs, and rough-looking men. A low hum of voices filled the space, a mix of gossip and bargaining, but to 10-year-old Alara, it was a terrifying roar. She stood on a rickety wooden crate, her heart thumping like a trapped bird against her ribs. Alara was an orphan, left alone in the world when her ma and pa had been taken by the fever. Now, she was just another thing to be sold. Her dress, once a cheerful blue, was faded and torn, caked with the red dirt of the prairie. Her bare feet scuffed against the rough wood of the crate. She tried to make herself small, to disappear into the noise and the shadows, but it was no use. Everyone was looking at her. The auctioneer, a burly man with a booming voice, stood beside her. He held a small wooden gavel, tapping it against his palm. "All right, folks, we got a fine, strong girl here. Good for chores, mending, tending to the animals. Who'll start us off?" Alara squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could be anywhere else. She imagined running away, far across the plains, but where would she go? Who would take her in? The orphanage had been crowded and cold, and now this. She felt like a stray dog, unwanted and unloved. She peeked through her lashes. The faces of the men in the crowd were blurry, but she could feel their stares, heavy and cold. Some looked curious, some looked stern, but none looked kind. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the chill, but from a deep, aching fear. She was small, yes, but she wasn't stupid. She knew what it meant to be bought and sold. It meant giving up all hope of ever being free, of ever having a true home. It meant being at the mercy of strangers, and she had seen enough of the world to know that mercy was a rare thing indeed. The auctioneer cleared his throat, ready to begin the bidding, and Alara braced herself for whatever came next. Alara felt a nudge from the auctioneer's foot, a signal to stand up straighter. Her small, trembling frame was hardly what he meant by fine and strong, but she tried her best. Her tattered dress, thin as a whisper against the dust, offered no comfort. It was too big in some places, too small in others, a patchwork of her short, hard life. Her hair, the color of dry grass, was tangled and unruly, falling into her wide, fearful eyes. Those eyes, the color of a summer sky before a storm, darted around the crowd. A few women in bonnets stood at the edge of the gathering, their expressions soft with pity. One older woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. But most of the faces belonged to men. Farmers with calloused hands, cowboys with sun-baked skin, and merchants with sharp eyes. Their stares were like needles, pricking at Alara's skin. They weren't looking at a child. They were looking at a tool, a pair of hands for their fields or their homes. "Now, who'll give me $20 for this girl?" the auctioneer bellowed, his voice cutting through the noise. Silence hung heavy for a moment, then a gruff voice from the back called out, 15. Alara flinched. $15. Was that all she was worth? A knot formed in her stomach. Another man, closer to the front, raised his hand. 18. The bidding began to rise slowly, each number a hammer blow to Alara's fragile hope. She listened, trying to guess which voice would be her new owner. Would he be old and mean? Young and quick to anger? Would she have enough food? Would she be warm in the winter? These questions swirled in her head, making her feel dizzy. Her gaze fell on a man with a long, gray beard, his eyes narrow and calculating. Then to another, younger, whose face held a permanent scowl. No, she thought, not him. She looked for a hint of kindness, a flicker of warmth, but found none. Only hard stares and the cold assessment of property. Her small fists clenched at her sides. She was just a girl, alone in a world that saw her as nothing more than a chore to be done or a mouth to feed. The air felt heavy, pressing down on her as the bids continued to climb, sealing her fate with every dollar. The auctioneer pounded his gavel once more. 25. Do I hear 30? His voice echoed across the square, making Alara jump. He wasn't talking about a sack of flour or a plow horse. He was talking about her. He spoke of her as a useful hand, a good worker, as if she had no thoughts, no feelings, no dreams of her own. He might as well have been selling a fence post. Alara's shoulders slumped, her small body trying to fold in on itself. The bids kept coming, each one a sharp sound that pierced her ears. 30, 32, 35. Each number pushed her further away from any hope of a life she could choose, binding her tighter to a fate she couldn't control. She felt like a tiny bird caught in a net, watching the hands of the hunters close in. Her eyes, still darting through the rough faces, finally settled on one man. He was large, with a bristly mustache and a cruel smirk. He kept raising his hand, his eyes fixed on her with an unpleasant glint. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She imagined scrubbing floors until her hands bled, working in fields under the hot sun until she dropped, all for a man like him. A cold dread seeped into her bones. $40, the auctioneer shouted, his face red with effort. Going once, going twice. Alara's vision blurred. The dust, the sun, the loud voices, it all swirled together into a frightening mess. She closed her eyes tight, wishing to disappear. She didn't want to be someone's property. She didn't want to belong to any of these men. Her stomach twisted into a tight knot, and a single, hot tear escaped her closed eyelids, tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. This was it, her last moment of not knowing. Her last moment of holding onto a tiny sliver of hope that someone, anyone, might see her as a person. The gavel was about to fall, sealing her fate forever. The auctioneer's gavel was already arcing downwards, a final, thunderous crack poised to seal Alara's fate. Going twice. For $40, he roared, his eyes scanning the breathless crowd one last time. Alara braced herself, a silent sob catching in her throat. This was it. The cruel man with the bristly mustache was about to claim her. But just as the gavel was a hair's breadth from the block, a calm, clear voice cut through the clamor. $50. Everyone turned. Alara opened her eyes, startled. Standing at the edge of the crowd, a little further back than the other bidders, was a man she hadn't noticed before. He was tall, dressed in simple but clean buckskin and a broad-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. His voice, though quiet, held a firmness that stopped the auctioneer mid-swing. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. $50, he repeated, a new excitement in his tone. Any more for $50? He looked at the cruel-faced man, who simply grumbled and shook his head. $50 was a high price, more than most were willing to pay for a scrawny orphan girl. The tall stranger stepped forward, his boots making soft thuds on the dusty ground. As he moved into the sunlight, Alara could see his face more clearly. He had a strong, kind face, weathered by the sun but gentle around the eyes. His eyes themselves were a warm, deep brown, and for the first time since her parents died, Alara saw not pity, not coldness, but a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It felt like peace. He reached into a pouch of his belt and pulled out a handful of silver coins, placing them squarely in the auctioneer's hand. "Here you go," he said, his voice soft but firm. "The full price." The auctioneer stared at the money, then at the stranger, then at Alara. He seemed a little stunned. "Sold," he finally declared, hitting the gavel down with a sharp, echoing thwack. Alara gasped. It was over. But it wasn't the man with the cruel smirk. It was him, the stranger. He looked at her then, a small, reassuring nod, and held out a hand. His hand was large and strong, but it didn't look rough or threatening. It looked safe. Alara stared at it, her heart still pounding, wondering what kind of man would pay so much for a girl like her. What did he want? The stranger, whose name Alara soon learned was Silas, gently took her hand. His grip was firm but not harsh, and for a moment, Alara felt a strange sense of calm. But then the old fears rushed back, swirling like dust devils in her mind. He might have kind eyes, but so did some wild animals right before they pounced. She had learned early that outward appearances could be tricky. Silas led her away from the noisy square, past the curious stares of the onlookers. He didn't speak much, which only made Alara's imagination work harder. What did he want with her? Why had he paid so much? $50 was a fortune, especially for a girl who couldn't even properly mend clothes or cook a full meal. Maybe he wanted her to work harder than any other master. Maybe he was just quiet because he was planning all the awful things she would have to do. He led her to a plain but sturdy wagon hitched to two strong horses. He helped her climb onto the wooden bench, his hand a steady presence at her back. Alara sat stiffly, her eyes darting around, searching for any sign of a hidden whip or a stern command. But Silas just settled beside her, picked up the reins, and clicked to the horses. They began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed as they left the town behind. The silence in the wagon was thick. Alara wanted to ask questions, to find out what her new life would be like, but her throat felt tight with fear. She imagined him suddenly changing, his kind eyes turning cold, his quiet voice becoming harsh. She had heard stories of children who were bought only to be treated worse than animals. She pictured long days of back-breaking labor, cold nights with no blankets, and hunger pangs that never went away. Every bump of the wagon, every shadow cast by the setting sun, made her jump. She kept her gaze fixed on the passing landscape, the rolling hills and sparse trees of Oklahoma, anything to avoid looking at Silas. He hadn't spoken a word to her since they left the market, and his silence was heavy, filled with unknown intentions. Alara was rescued from the auction block, but she wasn't sure if she was truly saved or simply traded one cruel master for another she didn't yet know. Her small hand gripped the rough fabric of her dress, waiting for the first sign of what her new captivity would bring. After what felt like forever, the wagon finally pulled up to a small, wooden cabin nestled among some trees. It was simple, with a stone chimney and a neat little porch. A wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, making the air smell of wood smoke and warmth. This was Silas's home. Silas helped Alara down from the wagon. He opened the cabin door and gestured inside. "Come in, Alara," he said, his voice still soft. "You must be hungry." Alara hesitated, peering into the dim cabin. It was small but tidy. A fire crackled cheerfully in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. There was a sturdy wooden table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner covered with a quilt. It looked nothing like the dark, cramped places she'd imagined. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes wide. Silas moved to the fireplace, stirring a pot that smelled wonderfully of stew. "Sit down," he offered, pulling out a chair for her. Alara sat on the very edge, ready to spring up at any moment. He dished out a bowl of thick, savory stew and placed it in front of her. Then, from a wooden chest, he pulled out a stack of clothes. "These belong to my sister," he explained, his voice gentle. "They should fit you better than what you're wearing. And there's a clean bed in the corner, all made up." Alara stared at the food, then at the clothes. A clean dress? A soft bed? It was almost too much to believe. She picked up a spoon, but her hand trembled so much she almost dropped it. She ate slowly, watching Silas from under her lashes. Every time he moved, even just to stir the fire, she flinched, her small body tensing up. She waited for him to shout, to tell her what work she had to do, to show his true, harsh nature. But he just sat quietly, eating his own stew, his eyes calm and steady. After she finished, Silas pointed to a bucket of warm water by the door. "You can wash up if you like," he said. "Then get some rest. It's been a long day." Alara took the clothes and the bucket of water to a small corner, trying to be as quiet as possible. As she changed into the soft, clean dress, she kept glancing at Silas. He was sitting by the fire, mending a leather strap, not looking at her at all. But even with the new clothes and the warm food in her belly, Alara couldn't shake the fear. This kindness was new, strange. She knew it couldn't last. She knew it. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month. Each morning, Alara woke up in the soft bed, still bracing herself for the harsh words or heavy tasks she was sure would come. But they never did. Silas remained quietly kind. He never raised his voice, never looked at her with anything but gentle patience. He gave her chores, yes, but they were simple. Sweeping the cabin, helping with the cooking, feeding the chickens outside. He showed her how to do things, not by shouting, but by doing them with her his big hands guiding her small ones. When she spilled water or dropped a spoon, he just smiled and helped her clean it up. One afternoon, Silas brought out a dusty book. "Can you read, Ilara?" he asked. Ilara shook her head, feeling a blush creep up her neck. She had never been to school. "Well then," Silas said, opening the book to the first page. "It's time you learned." He sat with her by the fire each evening, patiently sounding out letters and words. At first, it was hard, and Ilara felt clumsy and foolish. But Silas never hurried her. He would point to the letters, repeating their sounds until she got them right. Soon, the letters began to form words, and the words began to make sense. A whole new world opened up for Ilara, page by page. He talked to her, too, about his small patch of land, about the changing seasons, about the animals that lived nearby. He asked her what she thought, what she liked, what she remembered of her parents. He listened carefully to her hesitant answers, making her feel that her words mattered. He called her Ilara, always, never girl or child, but her name, said softly and with respect. Ilara still flinched sometimes when he moved too quickly or when a loud noise startled her. The old fears were deeply rooted, but little by little, like a tiny sprout pushing through hard ground, a new feeling began to grow inside her. This wasn't a cruel master. This wasn't an orphanage. This was something different. It was a home, and Silas, the quiet man who had bought her, was showing her a type of kindness she had never known existed. She didn't fully trust it yet, but the seed of trust had been planted. The little seed of trust that Silas had planted in Ilara's heart slowly began to sprout. She watched him always. She saw how he cared for his animals, how he spoke to the traveling traders who sometimes stopped by, always with a quiet respect. He never yelled, never hit, never even frowned in anger. He was simply good. It was a kind of goodness Ilara had never truly known. One evening, as Silas read from his worn Bible, Ilara, who was now able to sound out many words, pointed to a picture. It was a drawing of a family sitting together. "Is this what a family is?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Silas looked up, his kind eyes meeting hers. "Yes, Ilara," he said softly. "A family is people who care for each other, who live together, and who make each other feel safe and loved." Ilara thought about her own ma and pa, and how their cabin, though poor, had felt like a safe place. Silas's cabin, humble as it was, felt that way too now. It was a tiny space, but it was warm and clean and filled with a quiet peace. She had her own small corner, her own clean clothes, and a belly full of good food. She was no longer just a useful hand or a good worker. Silas called her Ilara, and he listened when she spoke. He looked at her as if she mattered. She stopped flinching quite so often. When Silas reached for something, she no longer tensed up, ready to dodge a blow. When he came home from working his small field, she found herself looking up, sometimes even offering a small, shy smile. She started to help him without being asked, anticipating what needed doing. She helped him shell peas, fetch water from the well, and gather eggs from the chickens. She realized, with a growing wonder, that she wasn't property here. She wasn't owned. She was cared for. Silas treated her like a person, a young girl with thoughts and feelings, not just a body to do work. His home was small, but it was safe. And in that safety, Ilara felt something loosen inside her, a tight knot of fear that had been there for as long as she could remember. She was starting to trust Silas. She was starting to believe that he truly was different. Months drifted by like clouds across the Oklahoma sky. The seasons changed, bringing cool autumn breezes, then the sharp bite of winter, and finally the gentle warmth of spring. With each passing day, Ilara blossomed under Silas's gentle care. The pale, scared girl who had arrived at his cabin was slowly replaced by a brighter, more confident child. She learned to read whole books now, sounding out the words with a quiet pride that made Silas smile. She learned to bake bread, its warm smell filling the small cabin, and to tend a small garden patch where tiny green shoots pushed through the soil. Her chores were no longer a burden, but a shared effort, a way to contribute to their little home. The biggest change, though, was in her spirit. The heavy knot of fear that had lived in her chest for so long finally unwound. She found herself laughing, a light, clear sound that surprised even herself. Sometimes, Silas would tell a funny story about a stubborn mule or a clumsy squirrel, and Alara would giggle, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes sparkling. She felt a sense of belonging, a warmth that settled deep in her bones. This wasn't just a place to sleep and eat, it was her place. Silas wasn't just a kind man. He was her protector, her teacher, her friend. He was the closest thing to family she had known since her parents died. She would often watch him as he worked, his brow furrowed in thought, his movements strong and steady. She felt safe when he was near. One sunny afternoon, while helping Silas mend a fence, Alara looked out at the rolling hills. "It's pretty here," she said, a genuine smile on her face. Silas stopped his work and looked at her. "It is," he agreed, his eyes soft. "And it's home now, isn't it?" Alara nodded, a comfortable feeling spreading through her. It was home. She had found a place where she was seen, heard, and cared for. A place where she was loved. The thought filled her with a happiness she never thought possible for an orphan girl who had once been sold like a piece of property. The memory of the auction still lingered, a faint shadow, but it no longer held her captive. She was free, truly free, in a way she hadn't dared to dream. Alara was no longer a child. Several years had passed since the auction, and the frightened girl had grown into a capable young woman, still quiet but with a steady calm in her eyes. Her laughter now came easily, a joyful sound that often made Silas smile. He had watched her grow, watched her transform, and his heart had swelled with a quiet pride and a deeper affection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery colors, Silas and Alara sat on the small porch. The air was cool and peaceful, filled with the chirping of crickets. Silas cleared his throat, a rare nervous sound from him. "Alara," he began, his voice a little softer than usual, "you've been with me for a good long while now. You've made this cabin a true home, and you've grown into a wonderful woman." Alara looked at him, a flicker of worry in her eyes. Had she done something wrong? Was he finally going to tell her it was time to leave? Her heart gave a small thump. Silas seemed to sense her unease. He shifted, then continued, I care for you very deeply, Alara. More than just a man cares for someone he took in. I've watched you find your strength, your joy, and I've thought long and hard about this." He took a deep breath. "Alara, I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife. Not because I bought you, not because you owe me anything, but because I want you to choose me. I want you to choose to stay here, with me, as my partner, my equal, if it's what you want to." He looked at her, his kind eyes open and honest, waiting. There was no demand in his voice, no expectation, only a quiet hope. Alara was stunned. She had never imagined such a thing. To be his wife, not a servant, not property, but a wife. It was a word that meant respect, a true partnership. She remembered the auction, the cruel men, the feeling of being utterly powerless. And then she remembered Silas's steady hand, his patient lessons, his gentle smiles. He was offering her a choice, the very thing she had been denied so long ago. The choice to build a future, freely and with love, with the man who had shown her what true kindness was. Alara looked at Silas, her heart full. The silence stretched between them, not with the heavy fear of their first journey, but with a new kind of peaceful quiet. She thought of all the years, all the small acts of kindness, all the patient lessons. She thought of the safe warmth of the cabin, the feeling of belonging, the laughter she had found again. He had given her everything, a home, an education, respect, and dignity. He had never once treated her like property, even when he had legally bought her. He had seen a scared child and had nurtured a strong woman. And now, he was offering her the ultimate choice, a chance to truly decide her own path. A soft smile touched her lips. It wasn't a sudden, fiery love, but a deep, steady affection, built on gratitude and trust. It was a love that had grown slowly, like a sturdy oak tree, rooted in the rich soil of kindness. "Yes, Silas," she said, her voice clear and steady, her gaze meeting his. "Yes, I will marry you." Silas's face softened, a gentle smile spreading across his features. He didn't rush to embrace her, didn't make a grand show. Instead, he simply reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. It was a quiet gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a promise of partnership, of shared lives, of continued respect. Their wedding was a simple affair, held in front of the cabin with only a traveling preacher and a few friendly neighbors as witnesses. Alara wore a dress she and Silas had made together, a soft calico with a few bits of lace Silas had found in town. She stood beside him, her hand tucked into his arm, feeling a peace she had never imagined. This wasn't a marriage born of desperation or of being forced into a new servitude. This was a choice, her choice, made with a full heart. She was no longer the orphan girl sold on an auction block. She was Alara, a woman choosing her own future, choosing the man who had shown her the true meaning of home and kindness. It was a union built on the strongest of foundations: trust, respect, and a quiet, enduring love that had blossomed from the most unlikely of beginnings. Alara and Silas built their life together, brick by brick, smile by smile. The small cabin grew with them. Silas added a lean-to for tools, and Alara cultivated a flourishing vegetable garden that fed them well. Their mornings began with the soft glow of dawn and the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread. Their evenings ended with quiet talks by the fire, reading, or simply enjoying the peace. Alara's past as an orphan, as property, faded into a distant memory, a shadow that no longer held her heart captive. She was no longer defined by what she had been, but by who she had become, a strong, kind, and loved woman. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her eyes bright with the joy of a life freely chosen. Silas, ever the steady and gentle man, was her rock. He continued to treat her with the utmost respect, valuing her opinions and her contributions to their home. Their love wasn't loud or dramatic, but a deep, comforting presence that filled every corner of their lives. It was in the way he would leave a wildflower on her pillow, or how she would have his favorite stew waiting after a long day in the fields. Sometimes, when a new family moved into the area, or a traveler passed through, Alara would hear whispers of the auction block, of children sold like goods. A pang would strike her heart, a quick memory of the dust, the fear, the cold stares. But then she would look at Silas, or at the sturdy walls of their home, or at the vibrant flowers in her garden, and the pang would soften into gratitude. Their story became a quiet legend in the small community, a testament to the power of kindness. People saw how Silas had taken in a lost child and, through nothing but gentle care and respect, had helped her grow into a happy woman who chose to share her life with him. It showed everyone that even the deepest wounds could heal, that suspicion could turn into trust, and that hope, even when it seemed lost, could always be found again in a true home built on love. Alara and Silas, together, proved that dignity was not something bought or sold, but a gift freely given and cherished. Their lives were a beacon, showing how a simple act of compassion could change a fate and build a beautiful, enduring future.